Welcome to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 starts a section of the book in which we begin to talk about different groups, gender, race, sexuality, and how those people within those different groups do family a little bit different. And so for this one, we're talking about race and ethnicity. I find that many people are uncomfortable talking about race and ethnicity, and it's probably because people don't know what's appropriate to share. Like people don't know if you look at a group of people and you're like, oh, those are Mexicans, is that being racist? And so I think the answer here is to say, oh, okay, well, let's find out what is considered racist and what is not. That this is not necessarily the focus of this talk, but I think just being informed and understanding the experience of people different than yourself is a step in the right direction to be able to speak about this because, well, you or I may feel more or less confident talking about this. These issues do really impact other people's lives. So whether we talk about them or not, they are still very much a reality for many people. So let's talk about what race is. Race is visual based upon visual biology. It's a man-made category that we use to put people in certain boxes that we call races, right? And that's why some people will say that race is man-made. Not that the biological differences are man-made. Obviously, we are visually different one from another. It's just that, like, does this person get placed in that box or that box? And can we take this box over here that's a lot of people and break it into three parts? That's the part that's man-made, right? So even in the United States, we've had in our history a lot of different racial categories, and people have been part of them and out of them, and things of that nature. So race is based upon visual biology, whereas ethnicity is based upon culture. A cultural identity, oftentimes based upon religion or national origin, and we can think about things like the language that people speak or the foods that they eat. And oftentimes it's something that's very close to somebody's heart, especially if they're not part of the dominant group. If you're the only person that comes from another part of the world and you're living in the United States, that that identity is going to be very important to you. And so if somebody is, in a town, you may want to be with them and live close to them because you feel like it kind of grounds you into who you are as a person. So the question comes up is, why talk about these differences between one person and another? We've been fighting about these, and it's been an issue, even recently. And you could say, well, why should we categorize people? Why can't we just say everybody's an American, right? Well, I think that there's some validity to that, but another thing is that we perceive ourselves and other people by these categories. And so some of it is just acknowledging the fact that we oftentimes tend to separate ourselves and other people based upon these categories. And we perceive people in these categories as similar. So if we meet someone from, a recent immigrant from Europe, maybe they're from Scandinavia, and we meet somebody else from Spain, and we're like, oh, the two of you are probably similar. They may not be at all, by the way, but we're going to perceive them as being similar, right? And if you look at an old U.S. city like Detroit or Milwaukee, what you'll often find is that the neighborhoods are very segregated by race. There's obviously a few exceptions, but usually like the majority of people in a certain section are part of one group or part of another, not very well mixed, right? And it also times impacts our ability to get justice. And so let's talk about some of the groups that are here within the United States. And let's start with the largest group, European Americans, or what we usually call them white people. White people typically don't think of themselves as having a race. And maybe that's just the benefit of being the dominant race in a region, is that you sort of exempt yourself from the categories that you put other people into. Right. One of the things to realize with whites is that their numbers are shrinking relative to other groups. We don't have that many European immigrants coming into the United States, and reproduction levels are about two. So two people are producing about 2 children each. So the population is kind of flat, but then you have new immigrants coming into the United States, and those are not coming from Europe. And the new immigrants are having more children, especially for the first couple of generations. And so that's causing more people of color, which people of color are just non-Europeans, to come to the United States. Moving on, let's talk about indigenous peoples, or American Indians. Traditionally, extended families was very important for indigenous families. A lot of cooperation amongst people. What is good for me is good for you. So if you're part of my group, my tribe, then I want you to succeed. There's a lot more openness toward sexual diversity. People, they have a belief about a third gender that's kind of a combination between male and female. They allow gay unions. Their population is decimated in a sense. You can think of Native Americans as being a conquered people. However, due to their willingness to intermingle, intermarry, their population has been growing in the past few decades. About 22% of Native people still live on tribal lands. On tribal lands, it is very a hard place to be. There's a lot of depression, there's a lot of alcoholism, there's not very many jobs, but people stay there for the reasons that people always stay with their group, because that's their group, right? And so it becomes a difficult decision, I imagine, for people to stay or to leave. So moving on to African American families, historically been shaped by slavery and by discrimination policies. Many African American families are matriarchal, led by a mother, and this is a reaction to poverty, because after World War II, many of the factory jobs, which employed a lot of African American men, especially places like Detroit and Milwaukee, all Chicago, a lot of the big industrial cities, those factories closed and moved, so to speak, to China and Mexico, Latin America, places like that. And so a lot of men did not, after the factories left, didn't have gainful employment. And a lot of times men will not form families when they don't feel good about their economic prospects, their ability to provide for a family. So, all right. In the United States, the largest Latino group are from Mexico. Many of them live in southwestern states. Realize, like Texas and California and New Mexico, places like that. Realize though that not every family that is there immigrated. Some of them were there for perhaps hundreds or even thousands of years. It's just that the land moved from being, well, it didn't move. It was Mexican territory, and then it became part of the United States because we fought a war against Mexico, and about half their land became ours after the war. In terms of what's going on in the home, it is very familial, meaning the family comes first. It's oftentimes very traditional and conservative. Dad's word carries a lot of weight, and Spanish is spoken in a lot of the homes. 75% of Latino homes have Spanish being spoken. Moving on to Asian Americans. Asian Americans occupy about 6% of the US population. The largest senders of people are China, India, and the Philippines. They are doing very well financially compared to other groups in the United States, even compared to whites. However, that's not uniform, meaning there are certain Asians that are really struggling, especially those from more southern Asian countries like the Philippines, like Vietnam. And so it would be a mistake to say that all Asian families are doing well. Another thing to realize is that we have a lot of immigrants coming to the United States from Asia who are very, very well educated. And surprise, surprise, they're doing very well financially. But if you're not very well educated, then you're struggling likely like the rest of Americans. What is the culture like? The culture prizes education. It's one of the reasons why Asians are doing so well in the United States. They say that, the best way to bring pride and glory to your family, honor is the word I'm looking for, is by doing really well in the education system. Respect for elders is very, very important. In many ways, Latino culture is similar to Asian culture because they're both familial. They're both would say the family is more important than the individual, and respect for elders is very important. Dad has a very prominent place. It's important to you that you would respect parents. Asians parents tend to be more authoritarian. Authoritarian parents, would be more likely to say, like, do it because I said so, because I'm the leader of the home, right? Today's immigrants from Asia tend to be families, professionals, and students. Let's look at new immigrants coming into the United States. These make up 15% of the people in the United States. So this is quite a large number if you think about it. That one out of every seven, roughly, people in the United States was born somewhere else. And if we were to include new immigrants who maybe not who are not born in the United States and their children, so that first generation, that's about 25% of our population. There's always been a concern in the United States that people who are coming from other countries don't want to be Americans. They don't want to speak our language. They don't really want to become like us. They don't really love America. Their loyalty is back to wherever they came from, right? There's always been that fear that exists. Realize that acculturation, becoming American, so to speak, usually takes about 3 generations. It takes the first generation, the parents come, they don't necessarily speak the language very well. Usually life is pretty hard for them, and they're going to kind of usually live in ethnic enclaves, like, with their own type of people. Their children oftentimes will speak both languages fluently, the old language and English, right? And they're seen as outsiders by both the natives, by the Americans who have been here multi generations, and their parents, because their parents are going to say, "Oh my gosh, you're such an American. Like, you're not like one of us anymore." And the natives, the rest of us, are going to look at them and be like, "Oh my gosh, you're so much like the old country where your parents came from." So they're kind of in a weird place. But by the third generation, especially if the second generation marries somebody outside that culture, the third generation oftentimes doesn't even speak the old language very well. So they're usually not fluent in that, and they're grounding the music they're listening to, their dress, the way they look at the world is as a native person. And so I always like to say, give it time. Let's look at interracial marriages, specifically those between blacks and whites, because those get the most attention. Historically, there have been legal sanctions where you can't do that, mob action, sometimes people die. Today, about 8% of blacks are married to whites, right? 8% of blacks. If you look at the black population, about 8% of them are married to whites, but it's way less for whites. I think only like 1% of whites, or maybe even less, are married to blacks. So it doesn't actually happen that much. It happens a lot more among Asians and Latinos, specifically women. That Latino women and Asian women are willing to step outside the racial categories that they identify with, and marry other people, and other groups are interested in marrying them or partnering up with them as well. So last thing here is undocumented immigration. That means that people are here without permission. The solutions to this are complicated because it's breaking the law, but there's about 11 million people in the United States who are undocumented, and most of them have been here more than 10 years, right? So it's not like finding somebody who's been here for a few weeks and picking them up out of, whatever job they found in the few weeks and moving them back. No, a lot of times they've been here for more than 10 years, sometimes 20 and 30. And so if you have that person, what what do you do? What if they have children? Do they get separated from their children? What if they own homes? What if they own businesses? Many times they're doing jobs that really need a lot of laborers, like farm work and construction work. So specifically, we really need people in the housing industry because we have a housing crisis uh, at the moment. And so the solutions are very complicated. to this. And so, and it's too politically hot. If you touch it and you try to create a solution, you're going to upset so many people that a lot of politicians are just like, forget it. I can't do it. It's not, no one's going to be happy no matter what I do. So thank you for watching.